I remember like, oh, this guy still actually has like dreams and things he wants to do, or like
this guy hasn't been broken
and
by the
I
world.
do too. I haven't
Yes.
been broken either, and we were both very like in a similar place of aspirations,
I didn't know
but
that.
also like creative aspirations, like because that's an element of it where we've landed in different ministry things, but at that time we were not aiming towards direct ministry. Welcome to the Bannerd Studios podcast. It's episode number 1.
Wait, this is episode number 1?
This is episode number 1.
Oh, I thought you'd done a couple.
No, we've done some tests
Okay.
and some demos, but this is
Cool.
going to be episode number 1 featuring Ian Johnston. And I'll let him introduce himself here in a minute, but the podcast is going to be talking with different guests who are believers and how their creativity has played into their journey through life. And it's going to be a lot of creatives, people that have worked in creative fields, some people probably from ministries that do creative things. So there's really creativity in all we do, I think. So how that plays into our life as a believer is going to be a lot of what is discussed. I'll start with just giving Ian a opportunity to introduce himself and give a little background of how we've gotten to this moment. You and me sitting here doing podcast number 1 for Bannerd Studios.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
I can't guarantee I'll get all my life story in, but I'll try.
Yeah, not your life story,
Okay.
just
Yeah.
the highlights.
Cliff
okay.
Notes. That's a very short thing, so that'll be good. No, I'm just gonna look at you when I do this.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Ian, and I am working in ministry here in Kansas City. I work 2 different, more prominent sides of ministry. So I work with it part-time with a church called Hillsdale Presbyterian down in Hillsdale, Kansas, the assistant pastor there. And then I work with you, Nate, and a few others up here in more downtown Overland Park, Kansas City area with Harbor KC. And we just launched that last year. And that's a young adult based or more focused ministry geared for the de-churched, the unchurched, and the nominally churched in our community. And that's been a blast. So, but my background, I'm got ordained in the EPC 2 years ago now, somehow. And my family's been in ministry. I went to seminary in North Kansas City and college in South Kansas City, and grew up in a rural town in Kansas. But God has just really spoken to me recently to use me to help create community, foster community, to preach, to lead worship, and to kind of do a mix of all those things these days, which has been great. I'm also a songwriter and a musician. I've been in professional music circles since I was in high school. I've been able to live in Nashville and record music there and work out of a lot of studios here in Kansas City. I would like to get more into worship songwriting. I have a few songs I'm looking to get done. But yeah, God is, each thing I've given to him, he has found a way to use. And so my life is a little bit of a reflection of that on a personal level.
Can't relate.
I think this studio is a great reflection of that for you, Nate. But on a personal level, I should have started with this, but my wife, Michaela, and I have been married for almost 3 years now, which is crazy. And
shouts out to Michaela.
Yeah, shout out to Michaela. And she's actually in ministry as well. She does youth and family ministry at the church that I work at in Hillsdale. And then she also helps out with Harbor, along with many of our friends. We have a 5-month-old, 6 months this month. Her name is Kerrigan Joy, and she has been the best thing to ever happen to us. And so kind of in the mix of all the ministry, we have learned how to do the whole parenting thing. And, it has been just such incredible timing for us in this life to have a new ministry mixed with an older ministry, mixed with a new family. Yeah.
I want to go back again
Yeah.
to that initial conversation where we were at in our lives when we first met and what we had talked about. And
Yeah.
it was because I'll share my like point of view from
Yeah.
it. My impression is like, it was like I was around a bunch of other people, a little bit older than me. You were younger at
Mm-hmm.
the time and younger than that crowd, like it's not kind of a bit younger than that crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I remember like, oh, this guy still actually has like dreams and things he wants to do, or like,
This guy hasn't been broken
and
by the
I
world.
do too. I haven't
Yes.
been broken either, and we were both very like in a similar place of
I didn't
aspirations,
know
but
that.
also like creative aspirations, like, because that's an element of it where we've landed in different ministry things. But at that time, we were not aiming towards direct ministry, both of us, I think. Correct
Yeah.
me if I'm wrong.
No,
but
that's true. Yeah.
and so that element of it, I think, is an interesting thing to talk more about, is like how we both had creative aspirations that were not um, directly ministry oriented, but we and then we pursued those to the full extent of our ability.
Yeah.
And in that process, um, landed in kind of a unique combination of things that none of at the time we couldn't have even imagined in different ways, and
Yeah.
so I just think that's an interesting element of that, of how I'll speak, you can speak to that in a sec here, but like from my perspective, it's like how God used creativity and my desire to be creative and he let me kind of fully run with that, and he let it lead me into a bunch of things that he then added kind of his words to, and it kind of is now this combination of, my passion for creativity and stuff is in what I'm doing with Banner Studios in this ministry, but also there's experiences he's taken me through
Yeah.
that's kind of honed it into this thing that, to be honest, that you might feel this way too, but what I'm doing now has way more of a sense of bigger than myself than what those aspirations were at that time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel lesser than, it just feels like added on to, and more whole. So I don't know, what's your
Yeah.
experience about, like, where was your mindset as a creative,
Yeah.
as a younger person believer, and then how has the creativity, are you in a place where you wish there was more opportunities for your creative outlet in the ministry you do, or are you kind of, did you feel like you stuff didn't work out? And yeah, just kind of speak to that.
No, it's a great question. So I was 21 when we met.
Okay, yeah.
So I was young and full of life and wanting to pursue stuff.
Was keyword.
Was anymore, no, it was something I was in the grind of a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 5 job.
And that was very creatively fulfilling, that job, right?
Yeah, that job was okay. I want to make sure I come off the right way. It was a good job, and I was given a great opportunity, but I felt that I was neglecting these areas of my life that I needed to pursue, right? And I kind of had the strategy of, I'm going to go take some risks in my early 20s.
Right.
Come what may, I'm not going to lose. I'm going to, if I fail, that's a win, and if I succeed, that's a win. But I need to know what I can do. I need to know what this is about. I spent my whole, I started playing concerts in front of people with my siblings and bands and stuff like that at 14. I had braces, and I was singing, recording albums in studios here in Kansas City, and that was my life. And then before then, my brother and I had YouTube channels and things like that where we did a lot of crazy things. And so my big picture was always really big. It was always like the sky's the limit. And that was dangerous for me as a kid. It was still developing. I kind of had to always find the next hill to climb and the next like impressive thing to do, and trying to keep up with my siblings who were ahead of me and impressed. It was always about trying to be impressive, and if you can be impressive, then no one's gonna. It was just that there was some performance element to it, and all the while I was growing in my relationship with Jesus, and eventually that had to come to a head, and I learned to not do that when I led worship and everything. But then I thought, okay, I can be a good Christian, and I can go and create music and do all this, and that's true. But I found in me that music was not the only growing and somewhat dormant thing that in that job that I was in, a business job out of college, that I hadn't been utilizing. So I decided that I was going to leave that position and move to Nashville, and that was what we talked about. So when I did, I felt that was this big release of creative stuff, and I got to make music, and it was really fun. I got to meet a bunch of people, got to wind up in some studios that I had heard records from when I was young, and I got to be like, oh, this is where that was recorded? Cool, I'm going to record my music here. Um, and that was, again, to me, it was outwardly impressive to be able to say that I did, but it was very inwardly empty. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't by fault of anyone. It was that I had built a craving and a desire and a kingdom around myself. And I was now going to test the limits of that. And ultimately that was left me wanting, left me completely depressed and broken, and it actually sapped my creativity as well, because I find that I'm creative when I'm filled. And so, like, being in a family now, like, being able to be filled up, although I'm really tired and I do way more now than I even did then, I'm more creative now because I feel like I'm rightly fueled.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I guess for me, and that's not for everybody, but for me that's been important. But anyhow, so the Lord, I think, has used that broken time in my life to not only give me an appreciation for the ministry I do now with young adults that go through, everybody has a moment of, am I going to build the kingdom of me, or am I going to get into the service of the true king?
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to continue to act like I am in control, or am I going to try to get into the service of the king? And so I was in Nashville, and I really felt like I was having success. I kind of looked around the rooms that I was in, and I saw a lot of people that were doing it for a long time, and I looked at their families and their marriages and their ministries. And again, some of them were doing really well. So this isn't a blanket statement, but for the most part, I noticed it was not what I was wanting.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to have a lot more of a presence at home with my future kids and future wife. And I just noticed that it was going to take a lot of sacrifice. They called it the 10-year town. I'm not like singling out any town or any profession. Just for me, this is what it was. That at some point I had to recognize, kind of the Shawshank Redemption idea, either get busy living or get busy dying. And I felt like I was doing things that didn't matter and trying to just pad my own ego and and fill that void that I had built in myself from a young kid that I had attributed to my dreams.
Mm-hmm.
But really the dream was the dreams I had before that were bigger, and they were, I want to serve God, and I want to be a good husband and father. And those were bigger dreams than I want to be famous or I want to be rich or anything like that. So kind of the order of operations that happened was I sat down with my dad and I asked him what, he was a pastor. So I asked him what what caused you to go into ministry? And he was like, well, I was working a really good job. And this kind of story, it sounded like mine. He's like, I was driving to work and I heard a sermon, a Billy Graham sermon, and I heard the worship song that went with it called I'd Rather Have Jesus by George Beverly Shea. And that kind of, the song just talks about, I'd rather have Jesus than silver or gold or all of men's applause or anything that the world can give. And he was like, and that struck me that I could, he used the term, I'm going to work under somebody's lights. Would I rather that be here? He was working at a tire place, here at the tire store or down at the church. And he was like, I feel like God's given me things that I'm not using. It's very similar to how mine. He knew how to preach, he knew how to run stuff. And so he went into ministry and did all of that. And for me, I was running away from, hey, my dad's a pastor. I don't want to be a pastor. That's too predictable. The art side, it's like, I want to do something that's not predictable. But in the end, I felt that God had built in me and given me gifts that I wasn't using.
Mm.
And I think when you're in that position and you're not being a good steward of what you've been given, the creative side of you suffers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, not only the creative side, but the ministerial side, your personal, how you view yourself, how you view other people, just your life suffers. If you and some people don't have a relationship with Jesus, and they have that suffering. I had a relationship with Jesus, and I was knowingly avoiding that. And that left me in a pretty rough place. So I had that conversation with my dad. I came back to Kansas City for a Bible study and for on my birthday that year. And I was in the Bible study and they told me, we're going to do Luke 10 today. And I'm like, okay. So I read in the beginning of Luke 10, Jesus sends out the 72 disciples and he tells them, the harvest is plenty, the
Mhm.
workers are few. Go, I send you out like lambs among wolves. And man, it punched me in the gut that day. That the harvest, that we need good leaders in ministry. And that may look different from place to place, but we need people that are willing to step up and lead the church and lead believers and all of that. And again, you can do that in music, you can do that in whatever
Mhm.
job that you have. But for me, I don't have electrician skills. I can't fix a car. I can't build a house. What I was given was the ability to do worship, to speak, and to galvanize people.
Mhm.
And I said, okay, well, what can I use all three of those things for? And it was the only thing was ministry.
Mm.
And then I did traditional ministry for a bit, and now, long story short, it's led me to church planting, mission work, and young adult, kind of out in the wilderness, young adult ministry, which is really a creative place.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
it's taken incredibly creative solutions to kind of get the things that we do and have the conversations that we have, and it's always different. It stimulates the part of me that can't be in the same thing every single day. It's always different. It's always challenging. And the sky is the limit. It's like if we do this, we're gonna be
Yeah.
changing my life and your life. Um, and so I found that the creative side, yes, writing music, recording music, playing and leading worship, all of that happens all the time. But the greatest creativity was being a useful tool for God to utilize. I'll say this is the last thing of that, and then you can do what you will with it. But the I was sitting with Michaela, just kind of talking a couple days ago, and I had felt like, although I was wanting to do it when I came back and I went to seminary, I was resigning the musical side of my life as kind of over. I know I wanted to go into worship, and that was cool, but it was different than like writing and recording music. And I was wrong, um, because not only have I written like 50 songs since having a baby, like that's been a whole thing. Oh, and getting married and all that.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
way more music that I've written. Just and it's for me. It's for my family. I don't have to feel like I have to get a bunch of streams to make it good. Like I think I'm happy with it. But the the leading worship side has been way more utilized and way more. I was like, if I was out on tour with a band and we played 6 nights a week, that's a pretty busy time. Like I could do that. And I looked at her. I'm like, okay, Tuesday night we have this. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday this week, like tonight and
Wow.
tomorrow.
Okay.
And I was like, that's 6 days of leading worship that we're
Wow.
doing this week. That is as much of a God utilizing a gift that I can give. I can't do any more than that. And that's more than if I was on like a tour bus or something. And again, not to throw shade at anyone that's on a tour bus, but for me, I felt like I was done. I was like, all right, God, I will give this away, all these dreams of this. And through kind of letting that go, he's built that up in the way he wanted to. And so I just had an epiphany of like, oh my gosh, you are using all of this. You are making this happen. And it was totally incognito to my ego, to my will. It was, you have slowly accumulated these things. And that was how it needed to be. And it avoided me trying to build any kingdom. It was like, I just said yes to things that he wanted.
Yeah.
And that has led to the greatest joy, creative fulfillment, work fulfillment, and personal evangelism that I could ask for.
Yeah. There's a couple things from the beginning when you were talking, and then through the whole kind of arc of, I noticed a couple themes that are interesting. Also, knowing my story and knowing how I feel like I've seen God work, with things in my life where you kind of have these moments where it's like you have something that's very significant to you,
Mm-hmm.
and whenever you get that way about something, you want to protect it and you want to make sure you got a good grip on it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this thing in the Christian life where it's like you realize that as humans, like it naturally turns into like idolatry. where you're kind of trying to get something out of you're trying to get something out of another thing that it really can't give because you're holding it too high or whatever. That's just like an idea that's been swirling around in me lately. And in
Mm.
kind of this context with creativity, I think when you're creative in our generation and all the things, even in the church and all this stuff, um, there's already a lot of feelings of needing to protect creativity, I think, or like how we grew up. Maybe it's more open now, but like because the artist is like, oh, starving artist.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the connotation is like it's you can't do it and it be wise. There's all these like there's all this like hesitation around creative careers or like lifestyles where there's all this negative association. And so I think already you can be set up to having a feeling of I need to like protect this, and sometimes you do. I mean, in a way, you do need to.
Mm.
If it's if you have a creative calling as a young person, and a lot of people around you don't understand the value of that, and then they kind of like push you into things you don't really want to do.
Yeah.
You'll just end up not being able to do those things and be burnt out. So, but then what can happen? So I think it sets up a lot of like where we were at the time when we met. I think we were both in this sense of like, hey, we had this thing in us, and we realized like other people don't have like they kind of either it's been squashed out of them or they didn't have that sense, but we're gonna hold on
Right.
to what we're gonna do. And there was
Yeah.
something noble about that.
Yeah.
Like there was something good about that, but then without sharing my what I did since then, but also there's a parallel.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we had to go through a process of letting it go, almost of giving it to God and being able to see, okay, and that just happens with these things we idolize in life. It's like the way to get them, because we can idolize things that are good and then they turn sour. So how do
Yeah.
you come back from that? It's like the solution is you have to give it to God
Mm.
and trust him to hold it. And what oftentimes is you'll feel like you lose something, or
Yeah.
you feel like you're
That's
letting it
exactly
go,
right.
and then yet he comes back with it and he's worked on it and he's shaped it a little differently. And like that's
Absolutely.
that's the cool part about like just anything and you do in your life, you're gonna see that's his nature, is like you're gonna give him something that's actually you need to let go of, and it doesn't mean it's gone. He'll bring it back and it'll be more. And I think in
Yeah.
the context of creativity as a believer, like you're just naturally inclined as a creative to be idealistic and with your creativity. And
Yeah.
so there's this
Yeah.
process that when you do give it up and you do give it in God's hands, he can bring it back and it can be this pure thing that's actually about more than just you.
Right.
And
I
I just
think
think it's
that's,
cool.
and I
Yeah.
know the world will get to our time limit, but I think what I really like about that is, and it's crucial to the idea of giving your life to Christ, but you're literally anything you turn over to him, you're saying, I'm willing for this to be used in ways that I don't expect and for other people. And anything that we hold on to, I'm saying, we generally say with that, I know how it needs to be used and I'm going to do it for me. And so when we turn it over, it can be something that we're good at. It can be, but it's we're no longer the ones that control it. And you're saying, yeah, if you want to use this 5, 10, 15 years down the road, then okay. Or if you never want to use it again, that's why it feels like you can mourn that, to some degree, but you shouldn't in the end, because it is taking what has been given to you by God and then returning to him with it. I think
Right.
of the leper that was healed, that Jesus healed on the outside of town.
Mhm.
He healed 10, and he said, go. And on the way, they were healed. On the way to the priest, they were healed. And 9 of them didn't come back, but 1 did. And he
Mhm.
said, this is the guy. This guy has returned thanks. And this has been, he used him. Like, this has healed you, and your faith has saved you. And if we are given great abilities to draw or to sing or to do business or to create things and fix things or whatever, then I'd say that the expectation is to return that thanks to God and submit it to him for his use and not ours. And it's really easy to say that, right? But
Yeah.
we all have to at some point figure out who's sitting number one in our life.
Right.
And for you, and I want to, that we have, I've heard your story on that before, and I'm sure you'll share that with your podcast. And for me, that was mine, where it was like, who's going to be number one in your life? Can you handle that, really? And so just to kind of close that thought and to finish that, for me, you said we like to live idealistically, and and we also like to live idolistically.
Right. Yeah.
We are
So,
idol factories,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's
yeah.
the term that we can use, that and that's the two sides of one of the same coin, right? So J.R.R. Tolkien, when he asked about how did you create Lord of the Rings, I said, why would you even think of that? And he said, well, we've been created, and I think I'm not quoting him exactly, but generally what he said was, and one of the great gifts that we have is to reflect our Creator in creating things.
Right.
And so it is this beautiful, like, divine thing that we get to partake in, creating. And I think we see that when we have children, that's one thing, but also when it comes to art and music and buildings and architecture and cities and relationships and all these things, that we get to be part of the creation of that. God has given us the ability to do that with him. We also can be a part of the destruction of things, and that's interesting. But the element of creating, that leaves open the door to idol creation.
Right.
And that's what the Israelites went through. That's what the whole Bible, you see the theme of, God, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now I'm going to go ahead and create the things that I want.
Yeah.
And so as creatives, we have a great opportunity, but it's partnered with a deep threat that we must always submit. So I'd say you're leaving yourself open to being used wickedly and as I felt I was, right? I was contributing to the problem. But also you have the opportunity to contribute to building the kingdom.
Yeah. And I think, like, hopefully this conversation is helpful to people that are maybe in the midst of, like, they're holding on, but they haven't held on too long yet, and they're kind of maybe still, going towards a place where, their expectations might not be met with their dreams. And
Yeah.
what do you do when that happens? It's like, those are the perfect times to give it to God. And also the other side is, I've seen when people do hold on too long, and it breaks in their hands, and it's kind of sad when that can happen. And then they can have this sense of, like, it can't be recovered,
Yeah.
and they give it up actually more than if they just were to hold it loosely before God to begin with.
Yeah.
And so, but even then, it's still God's nature still to restore. So it's almost like, whatever context you find yourself in with your creativity and where you're at with it, I hope it's helpful to always know, like, regardless, whatever you give to God, he is going to make beautiful in its time. I just read that earlier today. I was like,
Yeah.
that he
There's
redeems
a quote. So whatever I've given to God, whatever I've held onto myself, I've lost. I can't remember who says that, C.S. Lewis or Corrie ten Boom or somebody. Whatever I've held on to myself, I've lost. Whatever I've given to God, I've kept.
Yeah.
And that's it's funny, we both were prospecting that, but we didn't know we were entering the ministry side of it.
Right.
And now we get to kind of be in this, and who knows how he's going to continue to use it, the things that we're not aware of now.
Yeah.
But the testimony of all of this for me, and I think I can speak for you in this to anyone who's listening, is you are not wasting your talent or your creativity or your time when you submit it to God.
Yeah.
And when you submit it to God, he will, and you really treat that relationship with care, and you say, God, show me how to do that. Walk with me and in your time and not in mine. And in that, he will take that from you and heal it and grow it and use it in ways that you'll never imagine.
Yeah.
And we all have to come to a point where we're ready to do that, creative or
Yeah.
not, but
And
specifically.
and yeah, for creative, I think too, it's just knowing, like, it's especially challenging sometimes as a creative, because creativity and our imagination is so personal. It feels like
Yeah.
something it's like, at least I own that, right? Like, that's me, that I own that. But I think I did have to learn too. It's like, there were levels of it where I didn't know I could even give that to God. I hadn't thought about it that way. And so it's just like going through that, hearing other people's stories. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah.
Which is the goal of this ministry and this podcast, is
Yeah.
to make stuff that's helpful to people.
Yeah.
at the very least, especially creatives, but also just people in general, believers, wherever you might be. So
Yeah, thanks for letting me be your first guest,
yeah,
Nate. And
yes,
I guess I'll just say, if you have any interest in if you're in Kansas City, or if you have any interest in what we do, can I plug
yeah.
some of our stuff?
Plug
Just
Harbor there.
at Harbor KC on Instagram would be a good place, or harborkc.org is how you can find me and our ministry. And I guess that's it. I have music under my own name, I guess.
Yeah,
But I'm gonna be making some more worship music soon, and some more, every kind of song I write. And Nate, I guess this is your platform, so you don't really have to plug yourself.
No,
But
I'm
go
not
check
sure
out. I'll
yet.
say this:
Check
go
out
check out his stuff. His stuff is really cool.
BannerdStudios.com.
Yeah, and his Instagram, his
but
personal
also the
Instagram
channel,
is
this
great.
will go on. So yeah,
Great art, comic strips and everything too. So
yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Everyone watching episode 1. Stay tuned for episode 2. We'll see who we end up getting on here. I'm sure Ian, you'll be back probably at some point, maybe even sooner than later. But
Sure.
yeah.
Thanks everybody.